Last video that I put out, I talked about computers that could last a much longer time than what you typically see with store-bought computers. Computers that will hold up over a longer period. When you're trying to get a computer and you maybe are shopping for it in a store or you're shopping online, it's difficult to know what computer is going to last you. And I covered that in great detail in the last video where I focused on basic use. The discussion was not about software development. It was not about video editing. It was not about any of the advanced ways you could use a computer. It was about browsing the web, editing documents, and looking at photos. And for millions of people, that's really what they want to do out of a computer, but they don't want to have to buy the same computer every couple of years just to get basic use out of it. So I talked about that in great detail in the previous video. This discussion, we're going to bring in 2025 by answering a question from that previous video where I suggested a way for you to get a better computer. And I suggested that you buy that computer online. But for those that don't want to go that route and would rather do the traditional route of converting your existing computer, if it's a Windows-based computer, to a Linux computer, this video is slightly updated for 2025 to show you how to do that. And I say slightly because these techniques, they are pretty timeless. These techniques, if you've done them 10 years ago or you've done them 5 years ago, they are as relevant then as they are now. So let's first bring in the new year. So 2025, it's coming in, and it's going to be quite a ride for many of us. And so it's a journey with many possibilities, and it's exciting. Whatever happened in the past is the past. It's the future that awaits us. And it's the future that we herald in on this day, and we reflect on what can be and change our future and our destinies for the better. Looking ahead in terms of our technology, what is the practical way to do this if you want to do it yourself? And previously I did talk about in the last video the easiest way to get a new computer that's going to last longer, that's going to run better for basic tasks and all the basic things that you would want to do for the next 10 years. However, this process that I'm going to show you is the cleanest way to manually install Linux for those that want to do it themselves and are not ready to buy a new computer but want to take the computer that they have and upgrade it to Linux. Now, I already have Linux on this computer, but regardless of whether you have Linux installed on it or not, the steps that I show are the same. So, are you ready? So, I'm in Debian Linux on my existing laptop, and this is yesterday, last night, and I'm making the final preparations to switch this over to a new storage drive. So I'm back. I've already backed up all the files, and I've been preparing for this for a couple of weeks. And so the thing about this, though, is even if this process goes wrong, right, because of the way that I am doing this, I can always roll back. And my way of rollback in this particular personal private way, this personal way, does have a few steps in it. So you wouldn't necessarily do this in a big time IT setting, but this is how I chose to do it, right? And so Debian operating system, right? So Debian is the operating system that I've chosen. And this is the main website, debian.org, where you can download it. So I usually do choose the 64-bit PC DVD option, and I've already initiated the download for that, a version 12.8. And so with that done, this page here I find to be very useful and very informative. The live GNOME that you see there, live XFCE, live KDE, and other live ISOs, those are for creating USB drives that you can boot from and have Linux running off of that USB drive. What interested me was the section down here, buy a computer with Debian already installed on it. That's the theme of my previous video, not necessarily buying a computer with Debian on it, but buying a computer with Linux on it. And I thought it was pretty notable here to see that all across the world, there are companies that will build a computer tailor made for Debian Linux that accomplishes the process of having Linux on your computer in a much more straightforward way than what we're describing here. What we're describing here is the practice of taking an existing computer that was not made for Linux and updating it to have Linux, right? So also these live USBs, they're very important in that you can get them in a variety of flavors, and they can help you diagnose a computer. These come in very handy when you're trying to diagnose a computer and understand what is going on. And taking my own advice that I presented in the previous video, where instead of erasing the storage drive that I had Linux installed on, or in some cases, if you have Windows installed on it, I'm taking that drive out of the computer and I'm putting in a fresh drive and I'm going to install Linux to it. And so that's what I will be showing in this process. And so this is the actual computer that I'm updating. It's been featured in many videos. Ignore that little label you saw there that said Fedora desktop, right? I've had this flash drive for, going on 7, maybe 8 years. It's near its end of life, right? But I'm going to use it until it's no longer useful. When I plugged it in, you'll notice it presented Debian 12.1. That's the last time that I updated this flash drive, and we're up to Debian 12.8. So what I want to accomplish here is to erase this flash drive and put Debian 12.8 on the flash drive. You see, the flash drive is the way you kick off the setup process for Linux when you install it onto a computer manually, right? And so my tool of choice for this is disks. I'm already in Linux, right? But the way you go about this is pretty much the same even if you're on Windows. On Windows, you use a different tool. You might use Fedora Media Creator, Media Writer, or you might use a tool like Rufus. Rufus, RUFUS, is considered the best way to do that. But I'm using disks here, and I'm going to clean out the flash drive. It's not really necessary to do this, but I like to do this because it lets me know if the flash drive is still responsive. Um, Notice I clicked Create Disk Image. That's actually not what you want to do. So what you want to do is restore disk image. So the ISO file that I downloaded, the Debian 12.8 ISO file, it's considered a disk image. And you got to put that image onto something, either a SSD drive or a USB flash drive. Disks allows me to take that ISO file's contents and put it onto a USB flash drive. And it's going to do it in such a way where when I boot up the computer with this flash drive, it's going to boot Linux off of the flash drive. And then I can use Linux, in this case, to install Linux, right? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a fresh SSD drive into the computer. I'm going to put one in fresh. And this fresh SSD drive doesn't have anything on it. It doesn't have Windows on it. It doesn't have Linux on it, so it needs a way for Linux to get on there. It doesn't get on there by magic, even though this is magic. Um, and you take the USB flash drive, which has the Linux instructions on it, and use it to transplant Linux from the USB flash drive to the SSD that I'm going to put in the computer. And the steps that I'm showing you is the step by step way of how you can do that, the easiest way you can do that. There are other ways to do this. They're very sophisticated, super tech ways to do that. Um, my favorite is DD, which is disk duplicator. But disk duplicator, that is for people that are trying to do an exact image of an existing Linux system and do it in certain ways, and that's not what we're trying to achieve here. We are doing a very standard and very mainstream installation of Linux. And so that's what this process here is doing, is it's taking the parts of that ISO file that I downloaded, and it is putting it onto the USB drive in the correct sequence and in a correct way so that the computer will recognize it as a Linux that it can boot up from. So you can download Windows and do Windows in the same way. You can download Windows, a Windows ISO file, and you can do Microsoft Windows the same way. In fact, you can do Windows like this in Linux, where you can set up a bootable Windows USB flash drive. The difference here is that anytime you install Windows, you need a product key. And Microsoft is more well within their rights to do that. That's their decision as a corporation. You have to pay for that product key. It can cost you $100, it can cost you $200. And sometimes you end up with activation problems. You got to get on the phone or you got to get on a website and chat to try to get all that resolved. And by using Linux, right, you don't have those issues, right? Maybe there's something wrong with the flash drive. Well, just get another flash drive and do the same process. The troubleshooting step is very easy, right? So you just set up the flash drive and you boot the computer into it and you install it onto the internal SSD, and case closed, story is done. You don't have to worry about activating the computer. You don't have to worry about any of that. So we have the flash drive finished now. And what I like to do with every flash drive or external drive that I plug into a computer, I like to disconnect them properly, right? So I just don't yank them out because you can end up with damage to the data in the flash drive. And in some rare instances, you can damage the flash drive itself because there's some electric current that's going on. And there you should follow a controlled process of stepping that down. And these software tools offer a way of doing that. So you'll see in the disks utility, there is an eject button, right? It looks like a VCR eject. Who knows what a VCR or a Blu-ray play? Anyway, so there it is. So I've just ejected it. And with that, I can confirm that in the File Explorer. It doesn't show on the left-hand side, so it's fully disconnected from the system as far as Linux is concerned. It's still physically attached to the USB port, but um, but now we're ready to go to the next stage, and that's what's going to be very pertinent about this process, right? Is that this is not a virtual machine. This is not one of those processes where we are showing you how you do this using a virtual machine. This is live, on the metal approach to doing this. This is, that process from earlier, and that's the flash drive and getting everything set up on it. And, you know, it's amazing how, resilient and long term this process is. But what I want to draw your attention to is the heart of the matter, which is the SSD. And yes, I am holding it wrong. I'm rushing through this discussion, so I'm holding the drive wrong. My finger should not be where it is, because I could introduce electronic static discharge. So I realized that, and I tried to correct, but it's going to be fine. But so I'm moving from Samsung to Western Digital, based on my understanding, as of right now. The Western Digital drives, the WD Black, is performing better in many tests than many of the Samsung drives at the same level. There are different levels of these SSD drives, and for a PCIe 4 drive, this is going to be the way to go. And so um, we had finished that process of um, writing the Linux image to the flash drive, and I need to finish up my data backup there, and then we're going to get rocking and rolling on uh, booting into the flash drive, right? Because that's what we're really interested in here. So I have to shut down the computer, right? You want to shut down the computer, and then before we can do anything, we got to get the old drive out of there, right? And so that process, um, with this particular computer, involves removing 6 screws from the bottom. So I use an iFixit toolkit. I have 3 different iFixit toolkits that I collected over the years, but the one that I seem to use the most, especially when it comes to computers, is the iFixit Pro toolkit. And no, I'm not sponsored by anybody, though that would be kind of cool, I guess. Not really, because then I would have to do a whole long sponsorship ad. Anyway, so I got this iFixit toolkit, which has all the right screws for different computers. And, usually you'd use a tool to get the adhesive strips off the bottom. But I have upgraded this computer so much that I can just do it with my fingernails now, because there's been enough, you know, detachment that has occurred over time. And so you see where it says M2XL5. That's going to be one of the screws that will be removed. And so I'm removing the bottom adhesive strip, and um, you know that's going to allow me to remove 4 screws. And then there's going to be 2 screws at the bottom. And so you just take your time with it. I have my iFixit toolkit set up a certain way, um, to identify which um, screwdriver heads are the right ones for the laptops that I most often deal with. And one of the things I like about this particular iFixit toolkit is it has a magnetic plate built into the whole thing, where I can just put the screws, and they don't roll all over the place. And so for a compact toolkit, it's very very useful for what it does. And so yeah, you'll notice that the chassis for this computer is aluminum, which is what you really want in a computer. That's going to help with longevity. And so and that's the other thing about this iFixit toolkit is it has the right elements for um, removing a chassis, whether it be plastic or 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 aluminum or metal or some kind of alloy in between. Because you see, you can end up with jaggies, especially with plastic. With plastic, you can end up with these jagged edges along the side of the bottom plate that you know it can cause a couple of problems. You can disrupt your your airflow. You can increase the rate of humidity flowing into the laptop, and other problems. But with metal chassis, the issues can be just as pronounced, because you can end up with warping. and you can end up warping your chassis. So that's what I like about this. But also, trying to get a aluminum chassis off um, with your fingernails can be very painful. So, and not to mention much more unsafe because um, as you're trying to pull that chassis off, the laptop can slip right off of the table and fall onto the floor, and then you got bigger problems, right? So, using a toolkit like this is a safe, clean, and controlled way for getting that off. And so, I've gotten 70% of it dislodged. So now I got to address these two bottom screws, which uses a different head than your normal Phillips, right? So it's a hexagonal head. So I switched to that bit, and just get those screws off. Um, I was worried about the screws stripping, but I've been careful with it over the years, and so knock on wood, the screws have not stripped yet. So um, because I've had this laptop long enough that you know it predates the iFixit toolkit, so it's one of those things where I try to use your normal um, um, screwdriver set. You can get these screwdriver sets that have hexagonal bits to them, but they may not be just the right type for something like a laptop. And so, when I use those with this laptop, I did have some instances of, the starting of stripping. But once I switched to an iFixit toolkit, then I was able um, to get past that. So, now that I got the final screws off, we can move into, you know, getting at that's the battery right there. What you see there, the big long strip, that's the battery. And then to the left of the battery, our left, right, that's the SSD drive. It's the rectangular strip. It's not that metal plate. It's just what's on top, right? It helps with both heat dissipation, because remember what people used to say: SSDs have no moving parts. They don't generate heat. Folks, they generate heat. All electronics generate heat. It doesn't matter if they have moving parts or not. So I just removed my Samsung SSD, right? This is a quick operation, by the way, right? There's the Samsung SSD. There is the West. They look almost identical. I mean, it's a standardized part, right? In terms of how they socket into a computer. It's just who manufactures it, what's the capacity, how much data can it hold. So I'm going to put one in that holds a little bit more data, slot that in, and then put the metal plate back on top and screw it back in. So if you do this all the time, which I don't, then an operation like this can take less than 5 minutes. For me, it takes a little bit longer because I got to remember which screwdriver head that I'm using. Um, I got to remember to socket in the SSD properly. So it might take me 10 minutes. So it might take me a little bit more time, where it might take somebody who's accustomed to this. They might do it in 2 minutes, 5 minutes, or less. Um, but I think we're making pretty good time on this. But once this is screwed in, then that's pretty much it. I used to do these type of upgrades where I wouldn't put the bottom panel back on because if something did go wrong, then I didn't want to go through the whole process of having to apply the screws and remove the screws and all of that. So I kind of do it halfway now, where I put the bottom plate back on, but I'll put the screws back in after I have confirmed that everything works the way that I want it to work. So you just snap everything back in place, and you just get a good seal on it, because that seal is important. Having everything snap properly. That seal is important for airflow, for proper airflow, because laptops are precision designed machines, and you want to make sure that you have the proper seal on it. So let's power this on, and unsurprisingly, it says that um, I don't have an operating system. No boot device not found. Please install an operating system. At least these days they use the word please. Back in the old days, it would just say um, boot device not found and or something like that. So there's my boot device right there, the USB flash drive. I'm just going to plug that in, and then I'm going to press Control Alt Delete, right? Control Alt Delete is going to recycle it back to the beginning, and during that startup process, it's going to look for a boot device, and my BIOS or my UEFI is set up to look for an internal device first, right, and a external device second. Since I don't have since the internal SSD doesn't have an operating system on it, it quickly kicks over to the USB, and then I choose graphical install, and then I just go through the process of selecting the different the different options for Debian, right? And like I said, this is just a quick video, right? If this was a professionalized thing, you would see every screen, every keystroke and all that kind of stuff. But that would also be a very long video as well. And so my intent here is to keep this short, but to show you what's involved in it. So this is what you do to install Linux from scratch onto a new system or even an existing system, or in my way of doing it, to to do it with um, to do it with a fresh SSD. So I've reached near the end here, and I have my choice of desktop environments. This go round, I'm also going to toggle Cinnamon, because for some of the things that I want to do, I want to have access to the Cinnamon desktop, right? And so um, notice the speed of that. I think that's pretty good, right? Um, so pretty good performance. I like what I see here, and and all of that was internet. It was just downloading. Here is actual install, and so you know, um, not bad for a laptop that at this point it's been a couple of years. So but not bad. So I reached the end of the install, and so it says continue to reboot. So you just all I have to do is press that continue button, and you can remove the USB drive before or after you do this. Um, I usually do one or the other because sometimes I forget, and but I try to remember to remove that USB flash drive. But so I removed it after I press continue. It's best if you do it before you press continue. And then I still had it connected to the internet. And so it wanted to boot over Ethernet. So, so anyway, I just press Control Alt Delete again. And there it goes. It boots from the internal SSD. And this is what the normal boot up process looks like. I think sometimes the major companies they get hung up on how polished it looks and that you don't want to show this, but you do want to show this. You want to show that it's working. And so here we are. Um, there's my name, right? And when you have multiple desktop options involved or installed, when you click on your name, you can go all the way down to the bottom in this case, and you'll see a little gearbox. And this gearbox is going to show you the different desktops that you could use. So I'm going to choose Cinnamon, right? And I'm going to log into that, right? And that's what Cinnamon looks like. It looks like some kind of version of, Windows 7, Windows 10, Windows 12, right? And so that's one of the reasons why people often choose Cinnamon. This process is being shown live. This is not done in a virtual machine. That's what's unique about this process, the way that I'm showing. I'm showing it real. This is real, and these are actual USB flash drives, external USB storage drives, and this is the actual computer and actual screen. And so, it's helpful to see how this would work in actual real way as opposed to just screenshots or screen video recordings. And that's what I wanted to bring home here, is to show this is what you would have to do if you really wanted to get Linux on an existing computer. So that is the process of installing Linux. And again, this is the Cinnamon desktop. I like the Cinnamon desktop. Most of the Linux investment in terms of dollars go into the GNOME desktop, GNOME, right? And GNOME looks a lot like Mac, right? It looks like an Apple environment. And so I use the GNOME environment because that's where you're going to get the latest and greatest desktop technology from Linux. But I like this Cinnamon desktop as well because, we all have our muscle memory. And, Cinnamon, it calls to that muscle memory that I've developed from other environments, namely Windows. But here we're connected to the internet. Did a little test here. Firefox is there. So, if you just want to browse the web and edit documents and that sort of thing, Linux is ready to go out of the box day one with that process. And so I hope you enjoyed this brief walkthrough of going into Linux with your existing computer. But like I say, doing it by buying your own computer or buying a computer with Linux already installed on it is going to be the better way to go. As to the old hard drive or storage drive, should I say, right? So that Samsung drive still has an active Linux environment on it, right? So if I ever wanted to just, put it back into this computer, and that's another thing where it's different than Windows. I can literally put that SSD, that Samsung SSD, into another computer, and it will boot up, and it won't need a license key. It won't act crazy or anything like that. And Linux is already ready to go on that, right? So, yeah, so that's how I do it right there. And I'm gonna put this into cold storage, um, you know, and I essentially turn this into an external hard drive at this point when I do it like this, right? So this is called a drive enclosure, right? In this case, a M.2 drive enclosure. And so I plug a USB cable into this, and it works just like an external drive. So if I decide I don't need this second Linux environment that's on this drive, I can just wipe this drive and I can just use it as a 1 terabyte high speed external drive. For tuning in to this short discussion about putting Linux on your existing computer to make it last longer. And as I said in the previous video, the one before this one, that there's a much easier way to do this process. So as you consider your technology options for 2025, I hope this gave you another capability that will take you into the future and usher in more success for your endeavors, for your plans, and your hopes for the future. Until then, I will see you on the next one. So Happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year, and may all be blessed, and may we all make really great decisions and find ourselves into greater prosperity, longevity, happiness, and a higher quality of life and living. The dreams that we have can come true through all the difficulties. We strive and we work to a better outcome. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy century, happy lifetime, and happy eternity.